Some men raise a glass to celebrate. I raised mine to remember every single word being said about my daughter in a language they thought I would never understand. Welcome to today's story. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere unexpected. My name is Martha. At 54, I run Heritage and Time, an upscale antique restoration shop in Savannah, Georgia. Most people in this town see me as a quiet woman whose hands are permanently stained with wood finish and old wax, a single mother who spent decades sanding table legs to put her daughter, Chloe, through architecture school. Chloe is 26 now, brilliant, fiercely talented, and entirely blinded by love. 3 weeks ago, I booked a private corner table at Le Petit Chien, an upscale French restaurant downtown. It cost me $1,200 out of pocket. My only goal was to welcome my future son-in-law's family with grace. I wanted Henri and Elaine de Valois to feel respected, and more than anything, I wanted my daughter to see her whole world sitting in one room, getting along. I didn't get that. It started the moment the wine list was handed over. "Martha, is this truly the Bordeaux you selected?" Henri asked, holding the heavy bottle like it had personally offended his lineage. His accent made every syllable sound like a courtroom indictment. "It's a local reserve, actually," I replied smoothly, "from a vineyard 20 minutes down the highway." Henri set the bottle down, as if it carried an odor. "Ah, how resourceful." Elaine offered me a vacant, patronizing smile. "And what is it you do again, Martha? Construction and salvage?" She pronounced salvage as if it were grime you scrub off your hands before entering a civilized room. "Restoration contracting," I corrected gently. "I bring old things back to life." "How wonderfully practical," Elaine murmured, turning away. Practical, like I collected empty cans behind a convenience store. Across the table, Chloe was laughing, her hand resting over Lucas's palm. Lucas de Valois, my future son-in-law. Outwardly, he was everything a young architect could want: tall, tailored, with a smile that looked completely genuine. He had asked my blessing 4 months ago with tears in his eyes. I had hugged him, believing he was the safe harbor my daughter deserved. I let their condescension slide off my back. I've known hardship. In my early 20s, long before I owned my shop, I spent 5 grueling years living overseas in Europe, working rough restoration jobs around Marseille and Paris. I didn't learn French in a plush classroom. I learned it the hard way, by getting screamed at by foremen on scaffolding until every idiom was permanently burned into my brain. When I came home, I kept my fluency a secret. Nobody on a construction site cares if you can conjugate a French subjunctive. It never mattered. Until tonight. About halfway through the appetizer, Henri leaned towards his wife and muttered something low in rapid French, punctuated by a dismissive laugh. Elaine, entirely secure in the delusion that the provincial American mother across from her was a dull-witted artisan who only knew how to swing a hammer, switched languages instantly. They didn't lower their voices. To them, I wasn't a person anymore. I was part of the restaurant's rustic decor. I kept my face still. I cut my duck with measured strokes, and I listened. They started with Chloe's dress hanging safely in our guest room. Elaine dismissed it as pauvre and de mauvais goût, cheap and utterly devoid of taste. Then Henri mocked the way I had pronounced charcuterie earlier, doing a theatrical impression of my southern drawl that caused Elaine to press her napkin to her mouth. Small, everyday cruelties. Then, Elaine's gaze drifted towards the gallery wall near the hostess stand, where the restaurant rotates local artwork. And there, framed under glass, was a photograph of a custom cherry wood writing desk I had built 12 years ago for Chloe's 10th birthday, salvaged from an 1800s grit mill. I had spent 4 months sanding every joint by hand. Elaine tilted her head towards it, her lips curling into absolute amusement. Elle l'a probablement trouvé dans une benne à benne odeur. Americans have no concept of heritage. They simply bolt cheap lumber together and call it craftsmanship. I set my fork down. I didn't slam it, I just laid it against the porcelain with a single, deliberate click, the kind of absolute quiet that signals the ground has just shifted. You have no idea what just happened, my silence whispered, and I am not going to tell you, not yet. I raised my eyes. Henri caught my gaze, just a fleeting, testing glance across the candle flame. I smiled, an easy, warm, disarming smile. You know, I said smoothly in English, lifting my napkin to my lap, I've always believed that the things people build with their own hands tell you infinitely more about their character than anything they could buy with inherited money. Don't you agree, Henri? Henri blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Of course, Martha, naturally. Good, I replied, letting the syllable hang in the air. You have no idea what just happened, my silence whispered, and I am not going to tell you. Not yet.
3 days after that quiet, tense dinner at Les Petits Chênes, the peaceful elegance of my property quietly transformed into the setting for a carefully calculated, multi-layered trap. At Chloe's eager, innocent urging, Henri and Helene packed up their downtown hotel suite and relocated directly into the guest house tucked inside the quiet corner of my 3-hectare estate. A modest timber-framed home I had designed, framed, and built entirely with my own calloused hands during the bitter, exhausting months following my divorce from a man who had left us with nothing. Now they were sleeping soundly on floorboards I had laid down board by board, looking out over rolling green hills and land I had carved out of raw Georgia clay through years of relentless labor, sweat, and personal sacrifice. Lucas arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a heavy, worn leather portfolio tucked neatly under his arm. Inside was a massive stack of legal documents, 45 pages of dense, deliberately obscure legalese printed on heavy bond paper, filled with complex clauses and subclauses designed to make any ordinary person's head spin in absolute confusion. He slid the folder across my kitchen island with a smooth, practiced smile that completely failed to reach his cold eyes, urging Chloe to gently convince me to sign what he grandly called a comprehensive family trust agreement valued at $4.5 million, tied directly and irrevocably to the commercial real estate acreage I owned near the federal highway. Lucas leaned in close, his tone dripping with a suffocating manufactured warmth that made my skin crawl. You only need to sign as a nominal guarantor, Martha, to give me and Chloe the absolute financial foundation we need to enter Boston society smoothly. Chloe stood right beside him, completely transparent and pure of heart, her face glowing with genuine, unadulterated gratitude as she thanked his family over and over for such an overwhelming display of unexpected financial generosity. She truly believed she was looking at the solid bedrock of her future happiness, completely unaware of the sharp, hidden teeth lurking beneath the surface. I took the portfolio, held its heavy, ominous weight in my steady hands, and promised I would review every single line with meticulous care before the rehearsal dinner scheduled for the coming weekend. The exact moment my daughter and her fiancé walked back out through the front door, the artificial warmth drained entirely from my kitchen, leaving a profound, biting chill in the air. I walked straight to my private study, locked the heavy documents securely inside my floor safe, and picked up the phone. I dialed a direct international line to Zurich, connecting instantly with Vincent Sterling, a brilliant international financial attorney whom I had sheltered, fed, and helped back onto his feet during my hardest, loneliest days living in Paris 25 years before I ever opened an antique shop in Savannah. Vincent answered on the second ring, his sharp, gravelly voice cutting cleanly through the quiet evening. I didn't waste a single second on pleasantries or small talk. I opened the folder straight to page 12 and read several complex key clauses right down the line to him in fluent, flawless French, rolling the technical legal terms off my tongue without a single hesitation. Cross-collateralization, offshore holding entity, liquidation priority. On the other end of the line, Vincent went completely silent. The pause lasted long enough for the antique grandfather clock in my hallway to tick twice, heavy and ominous in the stillness, echoing through the empty room. When Vincent finally spoke back, his voice was flat, ice cold, and completely stripped of all professional detachment. Martha, listen to me very carefully. This is not a family trust for your daughter. This is an aggressive, predatory cross-collateralization scheme. If you sign this paper, your entire estate, your business, and every inch of this land automatically become primary collateral to wipe out a 3.2 million euro tax lien hanging over the de Valois corporate entity in Paris. They aren't trying to join your family. They are liquidating your entire life's work to bail out a sinking ship. The kitchen grew deathly still around me. I stared blankly at the dark glass of the windows, reflecting my own face, feeling the cold, steady realization settle deep into my bones. That night, looking out at the guest house lights shimmering softly across my lawn, I understood the terrifying full scope of their arrogant calculations. They genuinely believed they were the cunning hunters successfully cornering their unsuspecting prey in the dead of night. They had no earthly clue that the trap had already quietly snapped shut around their own ankles, and that the game had changed entirely. For years, people in this quiet town underestimated the resilience of a woman working with her hands, assuming gentleness equated to weakness. But living through the harsh winters of Belleville taught me how to survive when the ground gives way beneath your feet. Henri and Helene thought they could orchestrate a silent financial execution from across an ocean, using my own daughter's pure heart as their wedge.
Instead of letting fury or panic take the wheel, I slipped smoothly into a role I knew I had to play to absolute perfection: the blind, easily manipulated provincial mother. Anyone who has survived betrayal knows that the most dangerous enemy to an arrogant predator is not someone who fights back openly, but someone who makes them feel completely, utterly in control of the board. For the entire week leading up to the weekend, my sprawling estate played host to a silent, slow-moving psychological theater. I spent my mornings cheerfully preparing heavy, traditional Southern comfort food for my future in-laws, playing the part of the gracious, simple-minded host. Henri sat at my own dining table day after day, casually pointing his finger and criticizing how I seasoned my brisket, while Helene treated my kitchen like a hotel, snapping her fingers and ordering me to fetch extra linen napkins or fresh towels without a shred of basic courtesy. I took it all in stride, swallowing every bitter insult with a warm, vacant smile that completely blinded them to reality. They mistook my hospitality for weakness, never realizing that every time they humiliated me, they were simply digging their own graves a little deeper into the Georgia clay. Yet, the moment the guest house lights finally went dark each night, my real work began behind closed doors in the quiet shadows of my study. Hour after hour, I sat alone collaborating over encrypted channels with Vincent Sterling and a brilliant international financial forensics investigator he had flown in specifically from Zurich for this complex case. We didn't just guess at their desperation or rely on assumptions. We gathered the undeniable, hard paper trail. We pulled official bankruptcy and liquidation filings straight from the Commercial Court of Paris, unsealed freezing orders regarding Henri's hidden offshore tax evasion accounts, and tracked down the certified court records detailing Lucas's past commercial fraud lawsuits in Lyon from 2 years prior. Every single document was thoroughly translated, legally notarized, and compiled into an airtight 60-page dossier of absolute destruction that left them absolutely nowhere to hide from the truth. While the trap was quietly locking into place around them, my daughter Chloe remained blissfully trapped inside her own pink bubble, constantly forwarding me glowing text messages about how lucky she was to have found such a flawless partner. "Look at him, Mom," Chloe's text read alongside a photo of Lucas adjusting his designer lapel with a smug expression. "He is so thorough, so protective, planning every tiny detail of our financial future down to the last cent." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, feeling a sharp, agonizing twist of pure maternal grief clawing deep at my chest. But my fingers didn't tremble. I typed back a calm, chillingly steady reply. "Enjoy every second of your happiness, sweetheart. I will make sure your future has absolutely zero stains or regrets." She had no idea what kind of future I was actually preparing for her, and she had no idea how close the cliff truly was. As the week drew to a close, I finalized the master blueprint for the grand rehearsal dinner scheduled for Saturday night in the illuminated garden courtyard of the estate. I had no intention of stopping them early, and I certainly wasn't going to warn them in private. I was going to let them walk right into the lion's den on their own terms. I would let Lucas proudly place the 45-page contract on the white linen table in front of 50 of the wealthiest, most influential elites and socialites of our county, letting them eagerly pick up the pen and sign away their entire fragile illusion of victory right in front of the entire world. They wanted everything I built. I would give them the grand stage to lose it all in a single night. Looking back at how easily they waltzed through my home, sipping my vintage wine and laughing at their own cleverness, I knew the final payoff would be absolute. They thought they were orchestrating a brilliant coup against an isolated, unsophisticated widow. They never understood that true power doesn't scream or make threats. It waits patiently in the dark, watching the hunter walk straight into the cage with a smile on his face, ready to lock the heavy iron door forever. Every single preparation was meticulously accounted for, ensuring that when the curtain finally rose on Saturday evening, there would be no escape routes left open for them. They believed their charm was impenetrable, never suspecting that the very people they targeted had spent decades hardening themselves against the bitterest storms of life. All my life, I built this estate brick by brick with my bare hands, learning early on that nobody will ever protect your sweat and blood except yourself. I watched them toast to their future over my dinner table, completely blind to the fact that their toast was actually their final goodbye. The final pieces of the grand puzzle were sliding into place effortlessly, forming an escapable net that was ready to snap shut the very second they thought they had won. The grand garden courtyard of my estate had been completely transformed into a glittering fairy tale setting for the rehearsal dinner, lit by hundreds of imported paper lanterns dangling softly from the sprawling branches of our ancient rose bushes. A long mahogany table stretched across the manicured lawn, draped in crisp white linen that fluttered gently in the warm Georgia evening breeze, laden with crystal glassware and chilled bottles of vintage French champagne that Henri had proudly brought along himself just to show off his superior European tastes to the local guests. 50 of the county's most influential elites, local politicians, and wealthy socialites, alongside a boisterous group of Chloe's university friends from Boston, mingled cheerfully beneath the glowing lights, filling the night air with easy laughter and the constant clinking of crystal. Helene commanded the center of attention among the guests, draped in an ivory Chanel gown valued at over $14,000, her heavy diamonds flashing brightly under the festive lanterns. She laughed loudly at her own jokes, tossing her head back and flashing knowing, triumphant winks toward her husband every single time she caught sight of me scurrying around the edges of the patio, personally checking on the presentation of the artesian hors d'oeuvres to ensure everything ran seamlessly. She thoroughly enjoyed every second of playing the sophisticated aristocratic matriarch, visiting her country inferiors, treating my home as if the title deed was already resting safely in her designer handbag. Henry strode across the grass with an exaggerated swagger, stepping right up to me and clapping a heavy, condescending hand onto my shoulder with all the patronizing warmth of a feudal lord addressing a serf. He flashed a brilliant grin and spoke loud enough for half the guest list to hear, his thick French accent rolling heavily over the words. "My dear Martha, is everything finally ready for tonight? After the opening toasts, we will formally sit down and sign the trust agreement to secure the estate's transition. It is truly the only proper way to merge two families." I offered him a soft, humble, entirely submissive smile, dipping my head just enough to play the perfect part of the provincial mother. "Yes, Monsieur Henri, every single detail has been prepared with absolute care. Tonight is going to be a night our family will truly never forget." Satisfied with my absolute submissiveness, Henry chuckled darkly and walked away to join a group of local investors, completely unaware of the grim joke he had just made at his own expense. Nearby, Lucas sat close to Chloe at the head of the table, smoothly pouring more champagne into her crystal flute while whispering sweet, reassuring praises into her ear to keep her entirely under his spell. But beneath his warm, attentive fiancé facade, his eyes gleamed with the ugly, predatory glint of a desperate gambler about to rake in the final pot. Leaning in close to his mother, just inches away from me, Lucas chuckled softly and muttered in rapid, mocking French, fully believing that a simple country widow from the American South could never possibly understand a foreign tongue. "In less than 2 hours, all of this land transfers over completely. That country bumpkin of a mother is just too stupid to realize she is handing her entire life on a silver platter." I stood frozen in place, just 3 paces away from their chairs, my fingers tightly gripping the stem of my champagne glass until the cold condensation bit painfully into my skin. The liquid was ice cold, but it felt like liquid fire rushing through my veins. Every single nerve in my body hummed with absolute clarity, my mind sharpening into a razor-edged blade. They thought they had already won the war. They had no idea they were standing on a massive trapdoor that was about to swing wide open, and I held the only release lever right in the palm of my hand. The curtain was finally rising on their absolute destruction, and there was nowhere left for them to run. Looking back at how blinding their arrogance was, I knew that no amount of wealth or social status could ever save a fool who willingly walked into the fire thinking they were holding the matches. The stage was set, the audience was watching, and the final act was about to begin. For decades, I fought tooth and nail against every hardship this world threw at me, building this sanctuary out of blood, sweat, and relentless perseverance. They looked at my quiet demeanor and mistook it for cowardice, never realizing that true strength doesn't need to shout from the rooftops. Every single lantern glowing above us tonight was casting light over a battlefield where they had already lost before the first shot was even fired. When the multi-course main meal was finally cleared away from the long mahogany table and replaced by delicate silver platters of artisanal dessert, I pushed back my heavy wooden chair and stood up slowly from the center of the head table. I raised a thin, polished silver spoon and tapped it lightly against the rim of my crystal champagne flute. The sharp, clear chime cut cleanly through the warm murmur of laughter and clinking silverware echoing across the moonlit garden courtyard. Instantly, all 50 pairs of influential elites, local politicians, and wealthy socialites shifted away from their plates and locked directly onto me, waiting in polite anticipation for the formal opening words of the evening. Chloe beamed with radiant youthful pride, her face glowing under the soft lanterns as she happily began to clap her hands, fully convinced that her mother was about to deliver a warm, traditional toast blessing her upcoming marriage and welcoming her new family into our lives. She had no inkling of what was about to unfold right before her eyes. I looked out over the sea of faces, took a deep, steadying breath, and began to speak in English. My tone was measured, soft, and carefully woven with the humble, unassuming warmth of a doting mother. Thank you all so much for being here tonight to witness this special moment for my daughter, Chloe, I began, letting my voice carry gently across the manicured lawn. I want to offer a very special and heartfelt expression of gratitude to our dear in-laws who traveled all the way from Normandy, Henri and Helene. Thank you for crossing an ocean to bring such an extraordinary, generous foundation of future security for my children. Hearing this, Henri nodded with supreme, bloated satisfaction, a smug smile stretching across his face as he proudly lifted his champagne glass higher into the air toward me, drinking in the adulation of the crowd like a king receiving tribute from his subjects. Then, the floor dropped out from under them in a single, devastating second. Without warning, my voice shifted entirely. The warm, halting provincial cadence vanished in an instant, replaced with crisp, flawless, razor-sharp French. It was the polished, biting accent of upper-class Paris, the exact linguistic armor I had learned to master during my hardest years of survival overseas, long before I ever built a life in Georgia. Mais attendez, Henri, I said, every single syllable dropping like lead weights into the sudden, suffocating silence of the garden. In a single heartbeat, the smug triumph froze solid on Henri's face, leaving him looking like a mask carved from stone. The expensive crystal champagne flute in Helene's hand shook violently, the golden liquid sloshing over the brim and soaking straight into the front of her $14,000 ivory gown. Next to her, Lucas lunged forward in his seat, his face instantly draining of all color until he looked like a terrified corpse under the festive lantern light. I stepped out behind the head table, my footsteps measured and deliberate as I walked slowly across the grass toward their seats, my eyes locked onto theirs with absolute, unwavering intensity, letting the sheer weight of reality crash down upon them. For the past 3 weeks, right here in my guest house, you used that very same language to mock me as an illiterate country fool, to call my daughter an expendable pawn, and to laugh at the sweat and blood I poured into every inch of this land. Did you honestly believe that outside the borders of America, nobody else could understand the rotting, hollow arrogance hidden beneath your fake aristocratic titles? The garden grew so dead silent that you could hear the distant rustle of the rose bushes in the night breeze. 50 pairs of shocked eyes turned from me to the pale, trembling faces of the French family, realizing that the trap had finally snapped with absolute finality. Every single guest understood instantly that the tables had turned, and the predators had just become the prey. The air was thick with suffocating tension, and there was nowhere left for them to run or hide. Looking back at how quickly their arrogant masks dissolved when confronted with the unfiltered truth, I knew this was only the very beginning of the reckoning they had earned. The expansive rose garden of my estate suddenly plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant, steady chirping of crickets that served as a chilling, rhythmic soundtrack to the long-awaited reckoning. Every single pair of eyes in the courtyard remained fixed directly on me, holding their collective breath as the true scope of the betrayal finally began to unravel in the open air. Without breaking my steady gaze at the stunned, pale family sitting before me, I reached down to the mahogany table, unzipped my heavy leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized stack of official, legally certified court dossiers. With a deliberate, heavy motion, I tossed the bundle of papers directly onto the center of the banquet table, right in front of Henri. The crisp, heavy sound of falling paper echoed sharply through the quiet night like a sudden thunderclap, making several local politicians flinch in their seats. This is Paris Commercial Port Dossier number 984-FR, I announced, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and commanding, carrying every single shocking detail across the entire lawn for all 50 influential guests to hear, ensuring no one missed a single syllable of the truth. Henri's prestigious import-export corporation, Devaloy, actually went completely bankrupt 36 months ago, leaving behind a staggering government tax debt totaling over 3.2 million euros, alongside dozens of hidden, unpayable mortgage liens that have dragged his entire family name into the absolute mud. I paused for just a fraction of a second, letting the initial crushing weight of the revelation sink deep into the minds of the local elites, before turning my unblinking eyes toward the younger man sitting paralyzed at the table, watching the last traces of color drain entirely from his cheeks under the bright lanterns. And as for your beloved golden boy, Lucas, the flawless high society fiancé of my daughter, he is currently carrying an active financial industry ban in Lyon following a massive fraud scheme last year. He embezzled 850,000 euros from the private investment funds of local small business owners. A common fraudster facing international civil pursuit orders somehow had the audacity to step foot inside my home and pretend to be a visiting prince. Hearing those devastating truths laid bare before the county's most powerful figures, Helene let out a sharp, piercing shriek of horror that pierced the night air. She scrambled backward, her hands flying to her mouth as she attempted to stand up and frantically interrupt the exposure. But my gaze snapped toward her like a whip, freezing her completely in place with the sheer, unyielding force of my glare. I turned back to the stack of documents, my fingers deftly flipping straight to the final page of the infamous trust agreement that Lucas had sweet-talked my naive daughter into signing just days before in this very house. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the crowning jewel of their magnificent scam, the exact contract they desperately lured my daughter into signing. I held the paper up under the lantern light so everyone could see the fraudulent terms clearly. It is completely false to call this a family security fund or a traditional wedding trust. It is nothing more than a calculated cross-collateralization debt shifting scheme. The underground financial syndicates in Zurich and Paris were set to automatically seize my entire $4.5 million estate the very second the marriage certificate was signed, using my lifelong sanctuary to fill the bottomless, rotting treasury of your disgraced family. The moment those words dropped into the open air, the silence shattered entirely. All 50 elite guests gasped in unison, their jaws dropping as they stared at each other in utter disbelief. A storm of loud, indignant whispers and sharp gasps immediately erupted across the garden paths. Every single gaze of warm admiration instantly dissolved, replaced with looks of intense disgust, revulsion, and burning contempt, as 50 pairs of eyes turned away from me and locked relentlessly onto the trembling, exposed members of the Devaloy family, watching their grand illusion disintegrate into ashes right before their eyes. Looking back at the absolute devastation written across their trembling faces, I knew they had finally reaped the bitter harvest of their own unchecked greed. They had waltzed into my home thinking they were the clever hunters, completely oblivious to the fact that they were nothing more than trapped animals, awaiting the final iron gate to slam shut forever. Every single piece of evidence was laid bare before the entire world, leaving them completely stripped of their masks, their fake titles, and their desperate illusions of conquest. The garden echoed with their defeat, and there was no place left for them to run. Chloe stood frozen right where she was on the manicured lawn, the color draining completely from her face until she looked as pale and fragile as a ghost under the glowing festival lanterns. Her trembling hands suddenly lost all remaining strength, and her expensive smartphone slipped from her fingertips, dropping silently onto the soft green grass below, without anyone making a single move to pick it up. She stared at the man she had blindly trusted with her entire youth and future, before slowly turning her tear-filled wide eyes toward me, her expression a shattering mix of agonizing heartbreak, deep remorse, and utter shock. The fragile illusion she had lived inside for months was finally torn away, leaving her exposed to the harsh, undeniable light of truth, forcing her to confront the terrifying reality of the betrayal she had almost fallen victim to. Panic flared instantly across Lucas's face as he scrambled clumsily to his feet, lunging forward with desperate energy to grab Chloe's trembling hand and salvage whatever dignity he had left in front of the county's elite crowd of witnesses. "Chloe, please, you have to listen to me and let me explain," he stammered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of 50 glaring pairs of eyes. That was nothing more than a standard legal formality, routinely handled between wealthy families. Your mother is just exaggerating everything out of spite. Before his frantic fingers could even graze her skin, Chloe violently jerked her hand back, as if she had just touched a piece of glowing red-hot iron. She pulled herself upright, locking her eyes straight onto the face of the man she had planned to marry, with a gaze so fiercely cold and dead that it could have frozen fire. "You never loved me at all, Lucas," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet garden air with a crystal-clear, devastating finality. "To you, I was never a person or a partner. I was just a walking number, a convenient collateral asset on a corporate balance sheet, meant to bail your bankrupt family out of prison." Without waiting for him to stutter out another pathetic lie, and right there in full view of every influential guest in attendance, Chloe slowly slid the heavy $35,000 diamond engagement ring off her left ring finger. With a sharp, deliberate motion, she placed the sparkling stone down hard onto Lucas's untouched silver dinner plate, the metal clinking coldly against the porcelain. She did not lower her head in shame, nor did she run away to hide her tears in the darkness. Instead, she turned her back on him completely, lifting her chin with newfound pride, and walked firmly around the long banquet table. She walked straight over to where I was standing, closing the distance between us without a second hesitation, and stood shoulder to shoulder right by my side. It was a powerful, unbreakable display of solidarity, a moment of profound maternal love and restored family strength, blooming brilliantly in front of the stunned, watching crowd who held their breath at the sight. I immediately opened my arms and pulled my daughter into a deep, protective embrace, resting my chin on her head and pressing a tender, reassuring kiss against her hair as she finally let the weight of her tears fall safely against my shoulder. Then, lifting my head, I turned my calm, unblinking gaze directly toward Henri, speaking in a quiet, even tone that carried effortlessly across the silent courtyard. "I stayed silent for the past 3 weeks, not because I was weak, naive, or afraid of your threats. I stayed silent because I needed my daughter to see with her own eyes who was truly standing guard over her life, and who was treating her like nothing more than a disposable piece of livestock to pay off their overdue debts." Across the table, Henri and Helene looked utterly hollowed out, their faces completely drained of blood as they realized their grand manipulative game had finally collapsed into absolute ruin. They slumped downward into their chairs, staring blankly at the polished silverware, utterly defeated and utterly disgraced. They dared not utter another single word, completely crushed under the overwhelming weight of public contempt and the quiet, merciless camera lenses recording every second of their total downfall.
Without letting a single second of silence go to waste after their total collapse, I reached slowly into the tailored pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp, itemized billing statement detailing every single expense accrued during their luxurious, deceitful stay over the past 7 days. Walking with a slow, measured, and completely unbothered stride across the manicured lawn, I placed the heavy paper down flat right on the banquet table directly in front of Henri, letting the numbers speak for themselves under the dimming festival lanterns that illuminated our faces. This is the itemized statement covering high-end dining, luxury vehicle transport, and private guesthouse maintenance for your entire family over the past 7 days, totaling $12,450, I announced, my voice carrying evenly across the quiet patio so every lingering guest could hear clearly. I have already covered the initial processing charge on my end, but you are free to settle the balance with cash or a wire transfer before you step off my property. I then raised my hand and pointed calmly toward the grand wrought iron front gates of the estate, where 2 standard local taxis were parked with their engines softly idling, summoned by a phone call I had placed quietly 10 minutes prior while standing inside the main hall. The front gates of this estate are always wide open to welcome genuine, respected guests, but for thieves who wear stolen aristocracy like a cheap costume, the only exit is available right this second. The guest house has already been locked down by security, and all of your personal luggage has been loaded directly into the cabs waiting outside. Gritting his teeth until his jawbone locked in pure, agonizing humiliation, Henri hauled himself up from his heavy wooden chair. With his face burning crimson, he grabbed his trembling wife and son, practically shoving them ahead of him as they slunk away in complete disgrace. They retreated down the long gravel pathway, scurrying out of the garden under the freezing, silent stares of 50 elite witnesses who watched every pathetic, miserable step of their departure without offering a single word of pity or farewell. The evening celebration did not end in ruin or cancellation, as they had desperately hoped. Instead, the heavy atmosphere transformed instantly into a vibrant gathering celebrating awakening, clarity, and personal freedom. Several close friends and esteemed guests stood up one by one, raising their crystal glasses high to toast my unwavering backbone and my daughter's newfound courage, turning a moment of intended public sabotage into a genuine victory of truth and resilience. Later that night, long after the last car's taillights had vanished down the winding road and the entire estate had grown wonderfully still, Chloe and I sat together on the wide wooden porch beneath the warm golden glow of the patio lights. Chloe leaned her head gently against my shoulder, her breathing catching as she whispered a tearful, heartbroken apology for the blindness of her youth and the chaos she had brought to our sanctuary. I reached out, my fingers wrapping gently around her cold hand to share a deep, steady current of healing energy. My sweet girl, no diamond engagement ring and no fake ticket into high society will ever be worth more than your own self-respect and financial independence. Always remember this. A truly wise woman never spends her life searching for someone else's umbrella to stay dry. She builds her own strength until she can weather any storm. Under the vast, glittering canopy of the night sky, our family estate stood tall and unshakable against the dark hills of Georgia, serving as a quiet, enduring monument to unbreakable maternal love, fierce resilience, and the unyielding power of a woman who refused to bow to deception.
The legacy we built here was never measured by fake titles or borrowed prestige, but the fierce, unwavering integrity that protected our home from those who sought to tear it down from within. Every single stone of this courtyard bore witness to our ultimate victory, proving once and for all that darkness can never extinguish the bright flame of a woman who stands firmly in the truth. No matter what trials tomorrow might bring, we knew we were finally free, ready to walk forward into a brighter future of our own making.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.